So in the last episode, we were able to create React app, and in this episode, I want us to register the different routes that we'll be needing in our application. So before we do that, I want us to take a look at the different files that we have right here, and we can start with the public folder. And inside the public folder, you'll see that we have an index.html file. And this is the only HTML file that we'll be having in this application. And this is where you can change like the title of our app just right here. You can change React app to maybe to do app. And then you can define the different meta tags for the application for SEO purposes. You can also change the favicon just right here, or you can just change it from the public folder where we have a favicon.icon. And then when you scroll at the bottom here, you'll see that we have a div with an ID of root. And this is where our React app will be rendered so that the whole application appears as a single page application. So when we go to our SRC folder and check the index.html file, you'll see that we have an object called React DOM, and we have a render method where we are rendering our app inside the root. And this root is the one that is just right here in our HTML file. So we have a div with an ID of root. So from the index.html file, you can remove some of these files because we don't need them. For example, most of the styling we will be depending on material UI component. So I'll just remove the index.css file and also delete it from our SRC folder here. And then when you move to the app.js file, which is a component imported in our index.js file so that it can be rendered at the root of our application, you'll see that we also have some files that we won't be needing. For example, we don't need to have the logo here. I'll just remove it. We also don't need to have the app.css file, so I'll also remove this one, and I'll delete them from the SRC folder. So the app.css and also logo.svg. And then I want us to create our different components which we will style later, but for now we'll be using them to register our different routes. So in my SRC folder, I'll create a new folder called components. And then inside this folder, we'll also have several folders. The first one is the Auth folder. So in here, we'll have the sign-in component and the sign-up component. And then we will have the navbar. So I'll create a folder called navbar. And then the last folder will contain our to-dos file. So right here, I'll also create another folder called to-dos. And we can start with our Auth folder here. I'll create a new file inside the Auth folder called signin.jsx. And you can see the convention that I am using here. The file for this component starts with a capital letter, but for our folders, we are starting with small letters. And I am using JSX because this is a syntax which looks more like HTML, which we'll be using in React. And then now to create this component, I'll be making use of an extension which is available in VS Code called Simple React Snippets. So if I come to the extensions here and then search for Simple React Snippets, This is the extension that I'll be using, and it will make my work much easier when creating the different components. So if I scroll at the bottom here, these are the shortcuts that I'll be using. There is IMR, meaning import React, and then there is SFC for creating a stateless functional component. And if you are creating class components, you can use CC, and you can also use any of these shortcuts if you want, but mostly I'll be using SFC and IMR. So I'll come back to the sign-in component and I'll import React in this file using IMR. And then I'll create a stateless functional component using SFC, and the name of our component will be sign-in. And inside the return, I'll just include a React fragment and return a simple H2, but later we'll come back here and create a form for signing in the users. So right here, I'll just say H2, and I'll just say sign in so that we can know that this is the sign in component, okay? And then I'll copy this content of our sign in component, and I'll go back to our Auth folder and create a new file. And now this will be sign up. And I'll paste what we had in sign in, okay? So this is supposed to be sign up.jsx. So I'll add .jsx, and then I'll change now the sign in here to sign up. So you can select the sign in and then use Ctrl D, and you can edit multiple times here. Sign up. Now we already have our sign in component and sign up component. Let's go to the navbar and create a new file called navbar.jsx, and in here we'll have the navbar component. So similarly, I'll select this, use Ctrl D, and I can replace sign in with navbar. And then now we can go to our to-dos, and I'll create a to-dos.jsx file. And in here, I'll paste this content and replace sign in with to-dos. So later we'll be having more files in our to-dos, e.g. a file for adding a new to-do or listing the to-dos, and linking those files or components to these to-dos. So this will be like the root of our to-dos. But for now, this will be good enough for registering our routes. Now, to register our routes, we need to import a new module or a new library, which is React Router DOM. And first of all, we'll install it. Just open a new terminal, because the terminal that we already have here is running our development server. So open a new terminal. And then inside this new terminal, you'll just say npm I for install, and then react hyphen router hyphen DOM. And this should install React Router DOM in our application so that we can create our different routes. So press enter. And when I come back to my first terminal here, you'll see that we have an error in our app.js line 6. So I'll go to app.js, and this error is coming because we already removed our logo, but we are trying to display it in our application. So what I'll do, I'll just remove everything from in here so that we remain with a div with a class of app. Actually, I'll also remove this class name, and then I can just display a h2, and I'll just say to do app. And then at the top, I'll also import React in this file using imr, just like that. Now let's check whether our React router DOM was successfully installed, and it's still loading, but as it installs, we can import different components from React router DOM. So in our app.js, I'll just say import, and we destructure the browser router, which is a component coming from React router DOM. And then we will have a route component for registering the different routes. And finally, we'll also have a switch component. And I'll show you why we need this component in this particular file. So switch, and all this will be coming from React router DOM. And then we need to import our different components from the other files. We will import the sign-in component because we'll have a sign-in route. We'll also import the sign-up component, the navbar, and our to-dos component. So at the top here, I'll just say import to-dos, and this will be from components stroke to-dos stroke to-dos. And then we will import our sign-in component, and this will be from components stroke auth stroke sign-in. This is import, and then I will duplicate this so that we can replace sign-in with sign-up. Let's also import our navbar from components stroke navbar, and then stroke navbar. So now we are importing all the components that we need in this particular file. And as you can see now, our React router DOM have successfully installed. So I'll just minimize this one. And then we need to wrap everything that is inside our application with this browser router. And this will give every component in our application access to the history object, so that we can be able to navigate between the different components. So I'll replace this div with just a React fragment, and then I'll remove this h2 and replace it with the browser router component, which we are getting from React router DOM. So browser router, and then in here is where we are going to register our different routes. So the navbar should be accessible from every route. So at the very top, I'll include our navbar component, just like this. And then I will use now the route component to register the different routes. So right here, I'll say route, and the first prop for our route component is usually the path. So we can define the path for this particular route. So here the path will be equal to sign in. So I'll include stroke sign in, and then the second prop will be component, and at the component we will load our sign in component. So component will be equal to sign in. So when we navigate to our sign in path here, we should load the sign in component. I'll duplicate this and I'll change this sign in to sign up, and the sign in component here to sign up component. I'll change our Rust route path to be the root, and then the component that will be loaded here is our to-dos component. Now when I go to the browser, you will see that at our root, localhost 3000, we are loading the navbar, and also we are loading our to-dos component. So navbar will be accessible from any route because we included it at the very top. We didn't specify any path for our navbar. And then if we try to go to the sign up, so right here we can try to access our sign up. Now you'll see that we have the navbar, we have the sign up, but we are also loading our to-dos component here. So this is a weird behavior. We shouldn't have this to-dos component, but at least our sign up is loading. Let's try to load the sign in here by changing the path to sign in. Now we have the navbar, the sign in, and also we have a to-dos component being loaded. So this behavior is happening because the algorithm that is used to map our path will try to check all the paths, and if any of these paths are matching that particular path which we are loading, all those components will be loaded. For example, what I mean is that when we try to load our sign in path, our algorithm will also check the sign up, and also it will check this path right here. And you'll see that at the beginning of the sign in we have a slash, which is our last path. So this to-dos component will be loaded because it is matching this particular path, and then our sign in component will also be loaded because it is matching this path. So we will load both the sign in and our to-dos component. Now to prevent this behavior, we either use the exact prop. So in our to-dos component here, we can use the exact prop, and this will only load if the path is matching exactly this path. So if we have the sign in, this path won't load our to-dos component because in front of our slash we also have sign in. So this path is not exactly this one. Okay, so this is one way that you can do this. And when we come to our browser, you will see that we are on our sign up path, but our to-dos is no longer being loaded. And when we try to access the sign in path, you'll see that our to-dos is no longer loaded because this path is not exactly this one, our home page. So if I try to load the home, you'll see now that our to-dos is loaded. Another way you can do this is by using our switch component. So the switch component will load the first matching path. So if this path matches with what we have at our URL, this component will be loaded and the rest will be ignored. So if I remove the exact prop here and wrap our routes inside the switch component, so switch, and I'll then move these routes inside the switch, each path will be loaded at a time. If it finds the first match, the other paths will be ignored. So let's try to load the sign in our browser. I'll come to the sign in right here, and you'll see that we have the navbar and the sign in. So our to-dos is not loaded. So this is the one that I'll stick with right here. Okay, And this is how we register our routes using React Router DOM. Later on, we will be making more use of our React Router DOM, e.g. working with the links and so on and so forth. For example, on our navbar, we will have different links to navigate to this particular routes. For example, when we click on a link, we go to sign in, to sign up, or in to-dos. But for now, this is good enough. And in the next video, we will start going to the individual components and styling them further using Material UI. For example, we'll create the forms for sign in, for sign up. We'll create our navbar, and also we'll design our to-dos, how they will appear, and we'll also include a form for adding our to-dos. So this is it for this video, and I'll see you next.